Isha Bhutto, and all of you to the Summer Series 2020, Dealing with Fear and Anxiety. Nisha.
So in the conversations that we had in the previous session and in the feedback that you gave to us before tonight's session, we were asking about what were people worried about. And so here's some things that people talked about themselves: mental health, anxiety, fear, burnouts, how to support other people. Finances was a big concern for some people, or being made inessential, being out of a job. Physical health concerns for themselves, for other people, and then how to provide best care. So it really was such a range of responses, from kind of the details of the safety plan to how am I going to deal with my rent, to how am I going to support other people, my clients or my family members, how am I going to keep myself safe. And so last time we were talking about you as care aides, as the heart and the hands of the care system, and we have heard so clearly your deep caring, but also very real fears and uncertainties and vulnerabilities about how to be and how to work when we're dealing with this pandemic situation, which is new for everyone, which is very unpredictable, which is extremely difficult for human neurology, nervous systems to manage, is when we don't know what's happening for sure, when we don't have enough information. And one of the things that we know about the human nervous system is when we are feeling fearful, our nervous system will overrate the amount of danger that we're in and underrate our coping skills. And so part of what this evening's presentation will be about is some things that you can do, a little bit of information about how your nervous system works when you're under stress, and things that you can do to help your nervous system work the very best so that you can cope the very best and so that you can provide the very best of care. So first of all, just to acknowledge that it's a scary time. In my work on the hospice crisis team here in Victoria, I also go into homes. I'm also faced with some similar situations that some of you might be dealing with, not being able to be as close to people as I would normally be, trying to have conversations with people who are hard of hearing with a mask over my face, which means they can't hear me well. Trying to deal with a telephone translator because the person and I spoke two different languages, in full protective gear, mask, visor, goggles, gloves, rustly paper gown. And so I get some of what you're experiencing, although some of you will be even more in proximity with people and seeing more people in a day than I would be. So I want to begin just by taking a couple of deep breaths. I think we often think about stress relief as something that's going to take us a long time to do. And what I really am interested in is how we can use our own nervous system and our own breathing to calm ourselves in the moment so that we can cope the very best. So if you would take your left hand and make your left hand into a little very soft fist. So not clenched, but just a soft little fist. So this is about the size and shape of your heart. And your heart is just at the very slight left of the bottom part of your chest. And so if you just rest your hand there and feel the stability of that you can feel that physical contact, that you can feel for a moment your own self and your heart and your courage. We're going to take the right hand, nice and soft, love and compassion and kindness and care. We're going to cover our strength with our softness and our kindness, and just take a couple of deep breaths, deep being downward, like you were trying to breathe in and down behind your hands. And just start to feel your contact with what's supporting you, your contact with the physical ground under your feet and the physical ground under your bottom, and your back supported if it's touching anything, and your spine supporting you if your back isn't touching anything. Just take a moment to think of the people who care for you and are supporting you, and your colleagues who care for you and are supporting you. and to feel the feeling of care that you have for the people that you care for, which is actually very protective for us, as well as being beneficial to other people. So there's a thing that we can do very quickly, 15 or 20 or 30 seconds of just intentional breathing with awareness to the heart will change what our nervous system is doing, will change our blood chemistry, potentially will change how resilient, how flexible and able we feel. So early in the pandemic, as many of you probably experienced as well, there was a very changing landscape. We were getting different instructions every single day. Sometimes we could accommodate them, sometimes we couldn't. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask, be here, be there, don't do this, do this. We will make sure that you get a link from last week to a very funny video about a woman talking about all of these contradictions. And I found it very exhausting and I found it very nerve-wracking. And it was quite scary. And a lot of us really were feeling very frightened. And one day as I was driving to a visit, I was listening to the radio and they were interviewing Chris Hadfield, the astronaut, and asking him about COVID because he knows a lot about scary things and because he knows a lot about being alone. And it was the time when we had just gone into isolation. And he said something that was so striking to me, and I think it hasn't a day gone by when I've thought about it. And what he said is, I think it's really important that we learn to separate fear from danger so that we can think really clearly and move forward. And so part of what I want to share this evening is how you can help your nervous system differentiate those two things, your own internal feeling of fear from what is actually happening outside, so that you can assess what you need to do in the moment. So let's just start with, what do I mean by we've been under a lot of stress? And I'm imagining many of you would say, yep, this has been very stressful. So what I mean by stress is that something happens outside or inside ourselves that makes our nervous system have a reaction, our hormones have reactions, our circulatory system, our breathing, our immune system, all make changes to help us to deal with challenges. And this is, our bodies are built this way. And so that's in response to something that we see as a threat, like this is really scary and I could die from COVID, or this is a really challenging situation that we're all in together as a human community, and together we're going to figure out what to do, and I with my colleagues can figure out what to do. Mostly people will feel what we call stress as tension, but sometimes they feel it differently, and I'm going to talk about that next. And then I'll come back here. So in the middle of this chart, which is here behind me, is what's called the window of tolerance, or our comfort zone. So when we're in that zone, we feel like we can cope. We're calm and cool and collected, we're clear, we're courageous, we can connect, we can stay in contact with our compassion, we're very competent, we are curious, we're cooperative. I find it fascinating that all the words that I could think of to describe this were starting with C, like comfort. But often what happens when we're under a stress that feels like it's too big for us is that our nervous system will go one of the two directions. So for many people, what it does is it moves to the top of that chart. It gets what's called hyper aroused, like hyperactive, too busy. We get reactive, we get either fight or flight, so we get angry or we get fearful. Our brain starts to watch for more dangers and actually to overassess often the amount of danger we're in. We get defensive, we lose our perspective, and a whole bunch of things are happening in our body that are contributing to that. Our blood vessels are constricting, our heart rate's going up, our respiration rate is going up, our blood pressure is going up. If that doesn't work, or sometimes if people are feeling not so resilient at that moment, the opposite happens to them under stress, where they get kind of frozen, numb, dissociated, disconnected, hopeless, helpless, autopilot, can't concentrate, can't think, can't remember things. And so you can just take a second to reflect, has your nervous system gone one of those two directions under the stress that we've been dealing with? And it's not a judgment in any way. But what this diagram is about is learning how we can notice if we're here in the red zone, how we can notice if we're here in the dark zone, and we can come back to this area where we feel like we're able to cope well. So our stress response, all these changes that are happening in our body, are related to both what is going on outside of us, but also what's going on inside of us. The story that we're telling ourselves about what's happening can help us cope better, or it can help us cope less well. And that's what I liked so much about what Chris Hadfield said. And so, and the reason for that, or one of the reasons for that, is that our brain decides what kind of wash of chemicals we need under stress to prepare us to deal with the challenge that we're facing. And it turns out that there are different pathways in our nervous system depending on whether we see something as a challenge or a puzzle, or whether we see it as something threatening and very, very dangerous. So I want to tell you a story about some amazing research that was done where they put people under stress on purpose, and they had two different responses depending on what they did first. So the way that they do this test is that it's called a social stress test. So part one of the test, you are with a group of 5 interviewers, and they sit all in a row with a bright light and a camera on you. And they say to you, okay, you have 5 minutes. Please give us an impromptu, spontaneous lecture about everything that's wrong with you, all your failings, all your weaknesses, and we're just going to listen to you. And while you give your 5-minute talk, they roll their eyes, they look at their watch, they whisper to one another, they look at the ceiling. And of course, as you can imagine, the participants in this study found that very, very stressful. And then if you survived that part, they put you into part 2, where you went with a large group and you counted backwards by 7s. And the researchers would call you out if you made a mistake and point you out to all the rest of the group, or they would make the whole group start over because you made a mistake. And so again, you can imagine that these experiences were very stressful. People's hands sweated, their armpits sweated, their blood pressure went up, their mouths got dry, their hearts pounded, etc. They had a stress response. Then they did the research differently. They divided the participants into 2 groups. And the only thing they did different was this. They took half of the group, and before the stress test, they said to them, we're going to put you under a great deal of stress, and your body is going to have all kind of responses that you're going to think of as negative. Heart racing, your blood pressure, your breathing, your hands sweating. But this is actually marvelous. If you notice any of those changes, it means your body is preparing you for this challenge. And that's excellent. You're going to do better at the test than you would have otherwise. Then they put everyone through the identical test that I just described. And what happened is that the group that got the talk, who could see what was happening to them as challenge and could see the changes that their body was making as helpful, their blood vessels literally did not constrict and their blood pressure didn't go up. And so it turns out that stress isn't bad for us. What's bad for us is believing that stress is bad for us, and believing things are threats that might actually be challenges. So the work that we are going to do this evening is about staying in your window of tolerance, your comfort zone. And one of the ways of doing that is by connecting with your heart, as we did at the beginning. And one of the ways of doing that is by slowing down and becoming aware of your breathing. And it doesn't take long to begin changing your body out of stress response into a rest and repair response. What isn't good for us is chronic stress, when we're staying in a state of stress and we're not doing something to rebalance us. Our nervous system is built to rebalance a gas pedal and a brake, or a pedal on a bicycle and a brake pedal, or a brake control. And they're meant to work one and then the other, one and then the other. When we're under long periods of stress like we're in right now, we can end up in chronic stress and so caught up in the stories. And it's worse because there's so much social media and news that's also influencing how we're feeling. So when we're under that chronic stress, see again, do any of these things seem familiar to you? I certainly recognize some of them. And do any of them seem like you've seen them in your colleagues? So when we stay stressed, we get anxious and irritable and negative and more rigid. We can't think creatively. We lose our resilience. We can't pay attention. We don't listen as well. We're not as creative or able to plan or able to problem solve. We can't communicate with other people as clearly, never mind the masks. And what's happening is these fancy words at the bottom, which is that our vagus nerve, VAGUS, which is responsible for our rest, digest, repair, heal, connect functions in our body, stops working as well when we stay under stress for a long time. We have to get it back online, which is one of the things that heart contact does, one of the things that slow breathing does. And the other thing that can happen, that happens when we're feeling more resilient, is our heart and our brain and our blood pressure work well together as a team, and that's called heart rate coherence. So here's some equations that one of our physicians shared with me, and I kind of liked them. He said, part of why we suffer is that we're in hard experiences, and instead of just accepting that we're in hard experiences, we resist them. We don't want to be having the experience that we're having. I don't want there to be COVID. I don't want to wear my mask. I don't want to not be able to touch or hug people, but that's the reality. And so the more that I resist, if you think of making tension in your fist, the more you hold that tension, the more difficult and painful it is. So the more we resist, we suffer. But if we can be under stress and we can keep inviting ourselves to bring loving presence to the situation, we have much more chance of being resilient, of being able to bounce back, and we have much more chance of growing and learning from these hard experiences that we're in together. That said, as we saw from the list of what people were worried about, we're all, as Bonnie Henry says, Dr. Bonnie Henry, in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. So everybody's having their own different experience and responding differently. So when we're resilient, that word just means we can bounce back. We can deal with what we have to deal with. We can be calm and alert and flexible. We can adapt more quickly. We can even maybe thrive when things are changing, partly because we can see the stress as a challenge, not a threat. Partly because we can learn from bad experiences and make the best of them. And I like to think sometimes not of making things better, because the reality is sometimes very hard to make things better, but making them slightly less worse. And that I can almost always do. When research is done on people who are able to exhibit or practice resilience, the thing that they have in common across the board is that they believe that they can bounce back from challenges. They believe it's possible. And that's something that we can start to teach ourselves. One of the other things I think that's really, really critical right now is that we practice self-compassion, that we practice not only compassion for the people that we care for and compassion for our colleagues who might be be in a very different boat and having a different experience from us, but that we also practice self-compassion. And it's really important for us, but it's also really important for our ability to do the work. And here's what some of the research says about practicing self-compassion. And they call it sometimes kindfulness, like mindfulness. When we are kind to ourselves, we're more motivated and more able to learn and change. We have a better sense of what other people are going through. We are literally able to tolerate our own pain better. It deactivates our internal sense of threat because it lowers our levels of cortisol and it calms down a part of the brain called the amygdala that gets scared. And it makes us less perfectionistic, and it makes us less fearful of failing, which means we can learn better. And part of what's happening is that when we practice self-compassion or compassion for another, we get a wash of a hormone that's called oxytocin, and it's a stress hormone. And what it does is it's a natural anti-inflammatory. It makes us want to tend and befriend and care, or as Kathy, as you said yesterday, to flock, to join with our flock. It literally repairs any of your heart cells that are damaged by stress. And then it also does some interesting things in our own nervous system. It decreases our level of anxiety, depression, and burnout. But it also fascinatingly decreases our desire to control other people. So the more self-compassion we practice, the less it is that we think that we know better for everybody else and are trying to change them, which is usually experienced as better by the people that we're caring for and our spouses. So literally, like, you're not only the hands and the heart of the care system, which you so much are, and we're so grateful for the work that you do, but like, you could hold your own heart in your own hands during this scary, vulnerable time. We're going to take 1 minute to do a 1-minute meditation. There's decades of research on the impact of mindfulness on our nervous system and our ability to cope. Often when people meditate, they close their eyes, but we're not going to. Unless you feel a pleasant urge, you want to close your eyes, you can. So just take a second to sit up and let your spine be upright. Sit up straight, but not stiff. Sit up straight. Let your eyes be open but soft, the kind of eyes that you would look at a loved one, or the kind of eyes that you would look at a sunset. And as your eyes just soften up a little bit and you feel the support of your own spine, just notice your breathing. Let your body breathe in and let your body breathe out. Don't even worry about taking a deep breath. Just notice and sense your breathing. And wherever you are, rather than trying to block out what's happening around you, just let all your senses be wide open. Just let yourself hear what you hear and feel what you feel and sense what you sense. Any scents or tastes that you're aware of. Just noticing everything that's going on inside of yourself as well, thoughts and feelings. And whatever's there, inside and outside, just noticing the breath. Letting the thoughts and the feelings and the sensations that you're noticing come and go like waves in the ocean. And no matter what you're noticing, just coming back to the breath. When we practice these little moment breaks in our day, we can be more relaxed and resilient, more calm and alert, more capable, and our immune system will function as best it possibly can. So just take a little bit of a deeper breath, let that complete. So there's all kind of proven resilience tools. There's decades now of research. Slow, deep breaths, especially if we lengthen our exhale. Feeling both your hands at the same time. And this is actually a very old meditation technique. So just take a second, feel your two hands and see if you can feel them at the same time. Not just one, not just the other, but both, which takes your brain out of a part that's worried about not enough time. And I'm going to teach you one of the best daily practices I ever learned from an oncology nurse, a chemotherapy nurse. So if you happen to have a little bottle of alcohol wash with you, will you take it out? If you don't, you're going to pretend. And I'm going to take a nice handful of my alcohol wash. And for the first 15 seconds of my wash, I'm going to think about what I need to let go of. And so if you don't have wash, you can just be rubbing your hands 15 seconds. I'm going to let go of anything I need to let go of from my day, from my last client. And then for my second 15 seconds of my 30 seconds, I'm thinking about loving intention and what I want to bring into my next interaction with the next person I come in contact with. So another great way just to thread mindfulness and intention through your day while keeping yourself safe. Standing up strong and soft helps our nervous system function optimally. Paying attention to our heart. Feeling positive emotions, trying to feel love or gratitude or joy and send a little wash of that to you or send a little wash of that to your colleague. There's a great website on self-compassion practices by a researcher named Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F. She is a meditator who has an autistic child, and so she's not just talking out of theory, she's talking out of lived experience. She's a wonderful person. I wrote and asked her a question once, and she answered me within the day, "Love Kristen." She doesn't even know who I am. Savoring. One of the things the healthy part of your nervous system loves is to deeply enjoy anything. the sunset for 15 seconds, a chocolate for 15 seconds, a sip of water, breathing. Anything that you savor nourishes that rest, digest, repair part of your nervous system. And then you have item number 1 to put on your gratitude list this evening, which is 3 things you felt grateful for in the past 24 hours, whatever that is, that you got a glass of water, that you got a 15-minute break, that your child loves you, whatever that is. So that's enough talking from me, I think. And I'm wondering how people are feeling and what people heard, or any questions or observations people want to make about that.
Well, thank you so much, Misha.